Hi everyone, my name is Joanne, and I'll be doing a summary of Chapter 3, Ivory Laboratory or Glass House. So he starts the chapter with the question, can conduct be analyzed? So he talks about management of conduct. So he says that we're always adjusting our actions to the demands of the world, and to analyze behavior means to analyze those adjustments that we're making. And then he goes to say that people, places, and things are always controlling our actions. So it's the behavior analysts who try to find out how to establish, facilitate, prevent, or get rid of that control. The general principles of behavior are what make it possible to predict actions, and society should be responsible to determine when deliberate control of conduct is either desirable or not desirable. So, he talks about in our daily lives, he gives examples of how, like a teacher can change a student's behaviors in ways that show their new abilities, or like things that when they learn new actions or skills, or how a family shapes behavior, and how laws are basically statements of contingencies. And this control does not always have to be coercive, and the science of behavior is necessary for humanity to survive, according to Sigmund. And we need to change the way that we conduct our affairs, or else he believes that our humanity will die from neglect or suicide. And then he goes to say that like we have this knowledge of the danger of humanity not surviving, but we take little to no action on it. And that is because the consequences of our current actions seem so remote and far away that we don't feel like we need to take action right now. So we need to change those behaviors to become more problem solving. For example, like right now, coercion is often used in public policy, and for another example is how money is also coercive because it brings out fear. And so the use of nuclear weapons, their consequences are far away because of its environmental consequences, and economic expense is more immediately inconvenient. So we are more concerned, well, public policy is more concerned about economic expense than nuclear weapons right now. Then he talks about what does it mean to do an experiment. So he says that experiments can take place anywhere. First, we have to identify the behavior. So, like, which behavior is relevant and how can we define that behavior? And he also talks about behavioral measurements. So, how are we going to measure that behavior, and how are we going to ensure that the measurements are consistent and accurate? We also have to take into account other influences that are affecting the behavior that is not relevant to our experiment. And laboratories are the use of laboratories are important to keep changes in experimental conditions relevant. Experiments help us find any possible causal relations. So, for example, we can turn a behavior on or off or on and off by either applying or removing a relevant condition. So even small environmental manipulations can influence behaviors. And labs cannot duplicate all conditions of everyday life. At best, like laboratory research can select from the conditions of everyday life just those features that are relevant to the question at hand. So we would have to start with informed guesses from history, and then we test the knowledge from those that informed guess and the experiments that we've conducted by applying it outside of the lab. So on page 58, Sidman says that in a sense, the laboratory can be more real than everyday life. When successful laboratory experimentation zeroes in on the basics, removing irrelevancies and uncovering the fundamental conditions that make the world work the way it does and that make us act the way we do. So for example, test pilots, they'll use like model airplanes to practice flying first, and then they're able to go and fly actual airplanes effectively usually. But Sidman still also says there's still more progress that needs to be made in the science of behavior. The last section talks about from mouse to mankind. So face validity inhibits a science of behavior from developing, according to Sidman. So we can't solve the problems in new areas by just adapting general principles. So an alternative to studying actions that are relevant based on face validity is to just do the complete opposite. So you'd have to pick an arbitrary sample behavior, so it's like a contrived and artificial action, and this sample behavior would have no limitations or restrictions due to our personal judgment about face validity. So that arbitrary sample can become representative of all behavior, and it's possible to make generalizations to other actions based on type of this experimentation. So for example, like a mouse has dinner time once a day, and when it's dinner time, an experimenter can introduce a button with a light, and whenever the mouse pushes that button, a food pellet is dispensed. And the pushing of that button is not a typical behavior for a mouse, but that behavior of pushing the button will increase if the mouse is rewarded with a pellet. So from this experiment, we get the principle that consequences determine behavior. And we're able to apply it to other animals like chickens, pigeons, cats, dogs, monkeys, or dolphins. And he also says we're able to apply it to other behaviors like the mouse can pull a chain instead, or having a fish do a 360 spin in the water, or giving a monkey a treat every time that they groom themselves. Sidman also says that this principle can apply for more than just food, like some animals will increase or decrease certain behaviors for either heat, to get water, or for mating purposes. This principle is also applicable to human beings. So Sidman says that reinforcement is a powerful way to generate behavior in human beings and in animals. So for human beings, reinforcement is powerful for even typical and atypical children, and it can bring about either desired and undesired behaviors. So for example, when you want to teach, or when a kid learns to ask for something, the desired behavior would be them just asking for whatever they want. But if a kid tries to ask their parent for something and their parent just ignores them and doesn't give them attention, the next thing the kid will probably try to do is to yell the parent's name, and if they're still not getting attention, then the kid will probably then begin to cry, and that's when the parent finally gives them attention and asks what they want. So then the child finally gets to tell them what they need. And from that, the child learns to cry whenever they want something. And so establishing a reinforcement contingency, according to Sidman, is a way to tell a child non-verbally how to achieve certain means. And when we have an understanding of a child or a person's behavior background, and want to fix their behaviors, that would also mean that we should re-educate parents, because they had a big role in how their behaviors came about. And this principle is applicable to even to normal and disturbed adults. So for example, like hospitalization can be reinforcing to some adults that are disturbed, so they'll do a lot of reckless things just to go back to the hospital. Or even for normal adults, or almost everybody, like having a job is reinforcing because we get money, or even other consequences for keeping a job can be like prestige, influence, power, or good works or deeds. So in conclusion, Sidman talks about how the principle of consequence was discovered in a laboratory with a mouse, and then it was found to be applicable to humans and other animals. And the principles of behavior controlled by reinforcement contingencies is broadly generalizable, but still, like so much of our behavior is under coercive control. We have this tendency to think of consequences as negative or like punishment, but all behavior produces consequences, whether the consequences are desirable or aversive. And our conduct tends to be controlled by the possibility of punishment, and this reflects how apparent coercion is in our lives and our society. So we pay too much attention on consequences that decrease undesirable behaviors, but we should be paying more attention to consequences that increase desirable behaviors. Sidman also does end by pointing out that like so much behavior is rare or unusual that we'd be unable to like prove how all behavior came about. So the best way to figure out most of our behaviors are to look to similar behaviors to predict the behavior or come up with possible contingencies that cause those behaviors. So my discussion question, the first one is, what do you believe are the pros and cons of behavior analysis in respect to societal effects? So like the author talks about how behavior analysis is necessary for humanity to survive, but what about possible punishing consequences? And the second question is, what motivates you to get things done? Would you consider them reinforcing or coercive? So like personally, like for me, I used to tell myself to get things done ahead of time so that I don't get stressed out last minute, and that's more coercive. But like I've changed that now, and I've been able to motivate myself to get things done early, things like homework, work deadlines, cleaning my room, so that I can be rewarded with free time. And so that's reinforcing. And thank you guys.